Welcome to They Live by Film, a platform dedicated to bringing you film discussion and interviews from around the world. I am Adam Lundy, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-hosts Chris Haskell and Zach Bryant. Hello,
Hello,
guys. How's
hello.
things?
Howdy.
How we all doing?
I'm uh I'll try a Texas accent here for a second because we're down in Houston going to watch some baseball. Just here for a couple days. Got a game last night. We won, which was great. Now we're gonna go to a game as soon as this podcast is over.
How
I
about
don't know
them Astros? Am I right?
how.
The
Uh,
I will not try a Texas
Astros, right?
accent. I think the Appalachian works against it.
I think whatever Adam and I just did work against it too, so you're probably in good company, but
Well, I was going to sit there and say, that's kind of a bad sounding accent for a guy who's lived in Texas most of his
23 years, baby.
life.
I
Fake
rejected on
Texan.
principle.
Cool. Right, so obviously
Yeah.
we've three different movies. I think if I remember correctly, in the actual recording of the last episode, I only mentioned two movies, and I think we mentioned the third after we finished recording, if I remember correctly. But we do have three movies that we're going to talk about today. So before we get into it, does anyone want to talk about something they've seen in the meantime? It's been a couple of weeks since we talked, so I'm sure we all have stuff to bring up.
I have successfully went through all the Final Destination movies. I'm sure that was not as fun of an
You
experience as you
poor
think it'd
bastard.
be. Yeah, yeah. But I will note, like when I was going through, there's definitely some good ones. The first one, the odd numbered Final Destinations are actually good, and it's a really
Yeah,
weird thing. The odd
I have a
numbered ones.
nostalgia. I have a nostalgia for the third one.
The
Maybe
third
it's
one is the
because
best one.
of Mary Elizabeth Winstead. I don't know, but yeah, I definitely have nostalgia for the third one.
Yeah, I was like, I was kind of just going in like, okay, the first one's probably going to be the only legitimately pretty decent one, and then the rest of them will just at best be like schlocky fun, kind of like what you get from like a lot of later Saw movies. You're there to see creative deaths. But I give a lot of credit to the third one. I hadn't seen it in years, and I was like, this is just like a legitimately like really good movie, in the sense that like it's taking the concept and it's making the most fun version of that concept, and it's like putting a lot of work into doing it, and it's just, if I go back and rewatch one, it would be the third one. The guy David R. Ellis did two and four, and four is legitimately one of the worst movies I've seen in a long time. It is so bad. I'm like, it has to be like one of the biggest like downward turns I've seen from a horror franchise that has probably it's one of its best, if not its best movie, and immediately looks like it's made by an asylum film.
Is the fourth one the one where the disaster is at the NASCAR race?
Yeah, and that's I was actually
Okay,
looking
I
forward to
have
that
seen
because
that then.
that's based on like a real thing that almost happened. So I was like, oh, that's cool. I know a decent amount about NASCAR, and I'm like, this movie is trash. Like it makes no logical sense. It looks really cheap, and I'm like, this is the guy who made the second one, which is at least an okay movie. Like it's not good. It's the weakest one besides the fourth one, but it's like watchable. It's awful. I don't know what happened. And the fifth one's really good. I think the fifth one has a really good ending. That's probably the best part of it, as I think it ties in really well to everything else. But yeah, so that's been my start of, I guess, 61 days of horror between September and October. What about you guys? What are y'all watching?
Did we talk about how I've now seen 9 Hellraiser films? Have we talked about that at all recently?
I
No,
probably
right?
blocked it out because like I blocked out the time I watched them.
I think it was mentioned at some point, but definitely not in depth. I think you mentioned you were watching them.
So like, y'all, this is one of the most consistent horror franchises as far as like, um, I haven't got to the one that everybody hates where Doug Bradley doesn't play Pinhead because it was just like a weird thing. They made a movie in like 2 weeks to be able to keep the rights or something crazy. I haven't
Yeah,
made it to that
Judgment,
one yet.
Judgment. Yeah,
Judgment.
yeah,
But like the Rick Boda series, y'all, this is like perfect for something Vinegar Syndrome would do. It's Deader, Hellraiser Hellworld, and Hellraiser Hellseeker. I guess Hellseeker and then Deader and then Hellworld. These are fun, man. They're just like, I'm gonna use a word that's obnoxious, but they're like bursting with imagination. Like Rick Boda put so much into these direct to video sequels. Um, they're kind of fun. I like them.
Now, I want everyone when we start talking about Public Enemies here in a minute to remember that Chris said these were good movies when he starts trashing
Yeah,
Public Enemies. I want that to be on record.
yeah. At least they tried something new and original. Like the hell, like I don't know. I'm assuming that people don't like a lot of the direct-to-video stuff, um, because the acting is pretty wooden and I mean, I get it, but like they're pretty fun movies. Like he really went for it.
This is coming from the dude who said The Running Scared was a bad movie. I just
And Vertigo.
I don't think I'll ever understand you, Chris. I don't think I'll ever fully understand your taste.
Well, speaking of, right after that, I watched Diary of a Chambermaid from Buñuel, and what a great movie that is too.
I don't
Uh,
even know
Um,
what that is.
I can't remember if I've seen that one. I always mix that one up with Viridiana, and I actually think I've seen both, but like they are both just like merged in my brain, as two as one movie. But like
yeah,
I can never remember. I know I've seen Viridiana because we watched it in the film club in the very, very early
right,
days of the film club.
right.
But have I seen Diary of a Chambermaid? Let me just
It,
quickly check
it's it's
Letterbox.
essentially the woman. It starts off, she goes on a like a buggy or a train or something, and she's maybe no, a horse and buggy, and she goes to this estate. She's from Paris. She's from the city. She represents like the city life. Everything Buñuel does is a metaphor, right?
I have
And
seen it.
she goes to this like provincial country villa, and it's just the whole thing is about sort of the fall of fascism. And so like there's all these characters that represent different aspects of like the aristocratic French or fascism or just different things that Buñuel hates. And
Oh,
she's
it's
sort of
French. Oh, never mind.
yeah, yeah.
Ah,
She's proxy for uh how ludicrous it all is. Just well done. A huge fan of Buñuel. Love that guy.
Yeah, I
Um,
have seen it. It turns out. I think the problem with the reason I get them sort of confused is because they both take place in big country villas, right? So,
yeah,
but that and Viridiana is probably why I get them merged in my brain.
yeah. But that's
wait. So
Um,
is it a
there's
remake
more.
of the Renoir one? Because there's a Renoir one as well.
Um, I don't
no idea.
know. Should we do a
No, no,
French
I think you're
recap?
No,
mixed.
I'm not asking for us to do one. I'm just
Wait, is there a Renoir film
ignore
called
my
Diary?
question if it leads to that.
Is there a Renoir film
Uh,
called Diary of a Chambermaid or whatever it's
Yeah, it
called?
came out in 1946 when I started looking it up. Jean Renoir.
Oh,
Yeah, and
that
only
must be
one
super
person.
close to when the Buñuel one came out.
They're like 18 years apart. Yeah,
Oh,
they came out 18 years difference.
oh yeah,
is
And then
Diary of
there's
a
a
isn't it on?
2015 one. Good God.
Yeah, we'll do a Diary of a Chambermaid triple feature.
I'm sick
Let's
that
see.
week.
Yeah, no, it's based on the same novel. I can say that.
Ah,
I
okay.
don't know.
Okay.
Same
Yeah,
adaptation. Okay, that makes adaptation
Okay.
of the same novel. That makes sense. Okay,
Okay.
interesting. Perfect. So I know what I'm taking next time around. Um,
this is weird. It says produced by Burgess Meredith. That can't be the same one, right? That has to be a coincidence.
who the hell
A
is Burgess Meredith?
1946, huh?
Who's Burgess Meredith?
Oh, he's an
That's what I was.
American, like a pretty famous American actor.
Oh, but
But
you have to
He's the guy who
remember
played
that
in Rocky. He's the he's what's his name? His trainer in Rocky.
this was probably
oh,
when Renoir was in America.
that's
This was
that's weird. Burgess Meredith shows as the writer as well. Hold on.
Oh,
Yeah, that's the same. It's the same dude. Okay, so the old man in Rocky wrote and produced an adaptation of The Diary of a Chambermaid in 1946.
but more importantly, he was the Penguin in the Adam West Batman series.
that is pretty important,
Actually,
honestly.
yeah, his biggest role.
Interesting. Sounds like we'll have a lot to talk
Burgess.
about when we do that in a few weeks. Um,
Okay, let's get to
anything
some real
else?
cinema though.
Anything else you want to
Oh, what
call
about
out,
you, Adam?
Chris?
No, no, no.
Well, it's tangibly related. So when we last recorded, I'd seen no Michael Mann movies. I've now seen six. I've been watching a few of his films just to kind of get an idea of him as a filmmaker, of his oeuvre. So I'm just going to just talk briefly about the three that we're not going to be talking in depth about today. So I watched Heat, which is probably his most famous movie, really, and I hadn't seen it. I think I was always put off by by how long it is. I thought it was really good. It doesn't quite hit like masterpiece level that a lot of people talk about it in, but I thought it was good. Um, I have a hard time watching Al Pacino in movies because Bill Hader has ruined Al Pacino for me. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Bill Hader's impression of Al
I
Pacino.
have.
It's so good. It's stupid good. So like I can't watch Al Pacino, especially because it's basically him just playing his character from Heat whenever he does an impression of him. So I have a real tough time watching Al Pacino movies, but I was eventually able to get over it. That was really good. Robert De Niro was really good as well. The action sequences were all pretty cool. Um, I felt there was a lot of fluff. It could have been tightened up, and I think there's probably going to be a common theme when we talk about Michael Mann here. There was a lot of fluff. I understand why it's there in Heat because it is more of a character study than an actual sort of crime drama in a way. It is much more about the characters than the crimes. So I understand why there's a lot of fluff in this movie, but there was parts where I felt like we weren't really going anywhere. But I thought it was really well made. Like realistically, it's probably like the second favorite of all the Michael Mann films that I've watched in the last couple of weeks. Probably my second favorite one. I watched The Keep. I don't know if you guys have seen The Keep. It's so
I
bad.
have.
It's a really bad movie. It's not really Michael Mann's fault. It's a bad movie. I was reading about this and I thought it was crazy. The original cut of the movie ran at 210 minutes, and
Mhm.
the studio ripped 2 hours out of that to bring it down to a tight 90. So like the film makes no
Jeez.
sense, but like if you take 2 hours out of any movie, it's not going to make any sense. So it's really impenetrable. It has some cool vibes. Like I do get why it's a bit of a cult classic. It does have a bit of a vibey atmosphere, but the film itself, the plot is completely impenetrable. A lot of the acting is quite bad. The soundtrack from Tangerine Dream is so overbearing at times that you can't even really pay attention to what's happening on screen because you're just sort of bombarded with this sort of synthy rock score that they did. And I'm generally a Tangerine Dream fan. Their score for Thief, which I'm going to talk about in a second, I thought was really good. But it was very overbearing in The Keep. And it's honestly just like a real, like, it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb in Mann's filmography because it's like a fantasy historical horror. It's nothing like any of his other films. The best way I can describe this movie, and Zach, you've seen it, so you probably agree with this. It is the worst John Carpenter movie.
Yeah, it's
Um,
definitely feels like a John Carpenter. Yeah.
it
That's
feels
awesome.
very. It's so much like it's similar. Like even though the plot is not related at all, it's a very similar vibe to Prince of Darkness, which I also don't really like that much. But it just gave me similar vibes the whole way through. Um, but yeah,
Yeah,
keep
it's at Carpenter, like you mentioned, Prince of Darkness. I'd also say The Fog, where it's a very vibey movie, but not a
Yes, The
very
Fog is
plot movie.
another. Yes, it's also a great example. I did not like The Fog either for that exact reason. I still would prefer to watch Prince of Darkness or The Fog over The Keep again. But I
Yeah.
do kind of feel bad for Michael Mann because he did kind of get screwed over because, like I said, 2 hours got cut out. But one thing he did not get screwed over, and this is purely his fault, the man directed the most awkward sex scene I've ever seen in any movie. It is awful. It's so the sex scene in this film is so fucking awkward. It's pretty terrible. And then as I mentioned, I also watched Thief. I was trying to get through his most famous ones, and there's a couple that I didn't get a chance to watch since we last recorded. So the next ones on my list are going to be Manhunter and Last of the Mohicans.
Yes.
But I got to watch Thief. I watched that on Friday, and overall I liked it. Similar to Heat, there's a lot of fluff in the movie where it feels like nothing is really happening. It can be a little bit, maybe boring is the wrong word, but there's points in the film where you just kind of wanted to get back to the plot. And again, similar to Heat, it is very much more of a character study as opposed to the crime. So you can understand why, he puts a lot of fluff in here. But I feel like there's a lot of movies that he's made where they could be really great tight 90 movies, and he wants that little bit extra character work in there. So they end up running 2+ hours when it may be of a detriment to the wider film. I still think Thieves is a pretty good film. The last 30 minutes is awesome. And the scenes where the actual crime takes place, the actual robberies are really, really well done. So overall, it's a good film. James Caan kills it because he's a great actor. But yeah, I think we're going to end up, at least for me, where I'm going to end up talking about I talk about pacing quite a lot this episode. I don't know if you guys are going to be the same, but yeah. On that note, we'll get into the mix of things. So the primary focus for this episode was Michael Mann's era when he began using digital film, or digital sort of cameras to make his movies, and he was the first kind of mainstream director to really heavily utilize digital filmmaking. I'm sure obviously there was a lot of sort of smaller filmmakers who were doing it, but this is like the first guy who was like his movies were like real box office draws, who was using this kind of filmmaking. So I thought it'd be interesting to explore, his first kind of three movies that really utilize that heavily. He did utilize it a bit in Ali, as far as I'm aware, but the first one he really utilized it heavily is the first one we're going to talk about today, which was 2004's Collateral, starring Tom Cruise and Jamie Foxx. For those unfamiliar, I'll just give a quick rundown from Letterboxd. The cab driver Max picks up a man who offers him $600 to drive him around, but the promise of easy money sours when Max realizes his fare is an assassin. So I'm gonna jump to Chris. What do you think of Collateral?
Okay, I think this will be a fun one to do, a companion to They Shoot Pictures, and kind of look at box office, just to kind of contrast the two. It just dawned on me that we don't typically do enough recent films to be able to talk about box office tracking and stuff, but
No.
I know that's something that Zach is passionate about, and I've been tracking it for a long time as well. So They Shoot Pictures, it's interesting. It dropped 1,200 spots in the latest poll.
Jeez.
Yeah, which
So
is,
we can just knock that out as it's not reliable. That's fine.
yeah, right now it's at 3,911, which does feel low to me.
So
Yeah.
that's really low for me. Really, really low.
Especially
Yeah.
talking about like someone like Mann, who this is arguably his best film. Like, it's not my number one, but there's an argument there.
Right. Yeah, it's up by, just to put it in perspective of how many good movies there are in the world. It's up right next to Story of Floating Weeds.
I don't even know what that is.
The Rock,
Okay.
Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. So, I mean, it has good company. It just, hearing 3,911 feels low, I think, for this. And it's just a few spots above Shaolin Soccer, which we should honestly do a Stephen Chow day, one day. That'd be a really fun episode. Okay, as far as box office goes, $65 million budget, and the way that American theaters work, and I assume global, is you have to double that to break even before you even consider marketing cost, because theaters take 50% a cut. So you have to make, if it's $65 million budget, you have to make at least 130 million to even break even before you spend $1 on marketing. And I'm assuming they spent some money on marketing. So it totaled 220 million, which would put it right at about probably break even, or probably getting into profitable overall. I was expecting that number to be higher in terms of box office, because I guess we'll get into
Cruise
this
and
here.
Jamie Foxx. They're two huge
Honestly,
draws.
and at their peak, right? Like, especially Jamie Foxx, kind of at his peak. And the movie's amazing. It's just like, for this type of movie, it's just, I think it's, we'll unpack it a lot more here, but I loved it. I think it's very, very good.
And I think what helps this movie too, and probably why it hit the zeitgeist as much as it did, is this was peak movie rental 2000s. Like, this was a big like movie rental. Like, even if like it didn't get it today, but I mean, that's where I saw it the first time, was rented it from Movie Gallery. So I mean, it was a blockbuster type movie.
God, I remember now, because I was working at Blockbuster when this came out, and you're right. It had a whole, like, they have these like kind of bookshelf with, let's say it was 8 rows tall or 9 rows tall, and it had an entire bay of release of titles, and they were constantly checked out.
Yeah, and I mean, this was kind of there. It's so fun. It's interesting about box office now, because video sales are just kind of hit and miss. But there were, I think Matt Damon talked about this one time, where he's like, you could do these medium budget movies, And he's like, even if you didn't get profitable in theaters, you got a second bump when the movie released, so you knew you'd get
Yeah.
profitable then. And Collateral, I think, was one of those where studios are like, we may not make a budget, or it might be like a small profit, but we'll make it back in the video sales.
Yeah, you hear about that a lot, especially with like indie movies, like like Donnie Darko, didn't make any money in the theaters, but once it came out on home video, it became a cult classic.
Yeah.
It made so much fans, so much movies purely on the home video release. And I suppose the modern sort of example of that we see now are like movies that maybe get released straight on streaming and then end up being becoming cult films. Like if I remember correctly, the first John Wick movie didn't come out in theaters. It just came straight. At least it didn't come out in theaters in Ireland. It just
We
came
did
straight
get
onto
theaters
streaming.
here, but barely. Like, it was a heavily debated, is this going to theaters or not? And it, like, I think from my understanding, it was like a last minute change, said, yeah, we'll try the theater run.
Yeah, it
It just
definitely
didn't
didn't
make
get the.
anything.
Yeah, it didn't. It definitely didn't get theaters in Ireland. It went straight onto streaming. I can't remember if it was Netflix or Prime or so. It went straight to streaming in Ireland, and then obviously it's become a huge global franchise. So that's the kind of modern sort of comparison that we kind of give to these movies, but they didn't make a ton of money in the box office, but then got a lot of money in movie rentals and stuff like that when it went to physical media. But we are very much veering into the territory of the Blank Check podcast, so
Oh, okay. Yeah, we
uh,
probably should. Yeah.
we'll run it back. We don't want to get a cease and desist from those guys. They're
Great
very
podcast,
well
by the way.
respected. Friends of our podcast, even if they may not be friends with us, we can be friends with them. But yeah, Collateral. This was definitely my favorite movie of all the Michael Manns I've seen. I thought it was absolutely great. You guys know that I'm a big TC fan. I do like Tom Cruise, not as a person, but I think he's a great actor. I really, really like his movies. I really like him as an actor, and he's so good in this. But as good as he is in this, Jamie Foxx just absolutely just knocks it out of the park. Absolutely
Yeah.
kills this movie. He's so good. Um, and it's like weird. I feel like Jamie Foxx is kind of like, because he's so popular, because he's like such a populist kind of guy, I feel like he doesn't get the credit that he deserves when he is really good at something, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Like he just seems like this kind of guy who's like, oh yeah, it's Jamie Foxx. Yeah, he's good. But like there's times where he is great. And this is one of the movies where he is like superb.
Mhm.
I think, and I wonder if it's because, like, when we think of his like best performances, a lot of them are with like a lot of top tier considered directors. Like, you look at, when he played Django, it was with Quentin Tarantino. He had a great performance in Baby Driver with Wright, and of course he did this with that. And so people almost like take it away to say, oh, well, it was because he was paired with a good director. I don't know. I feel like I hear that more with Fox than a lot of other actors for some reason.
Yeah, but
Interesting.
like who directed Ray? Like I don't think that was a big director. Who
Who did
directed
direct
Ray?
Ray?
I have no
That's a good one.
idea.
I forgot. I'm gonna look it up because I
And
actually
I
don't
think
he
that
know.
was
won an
Spielberg.
Oscar. I don't think it was.
No, I'm just
Was
kidding.
it?
No, I don't think it was.
Taylor
He
Hackford. Who? What
and
is
like
he?
he won an Oscar for that movie, right? That's what didn't Jamie
Yeah,
Foxx win an Oscar for Ray?
but I do want to note Taylor Hackford also directed Devil's Advocate, so that is a pretty top tier director if I've ever seen one.
And like there's also the fact that like as bad as the Amazing Spider-Man 2 movie is, like Jamie Foxx is so good in it. Like he was so good, that's what kind of gave him the idea to bring him back for the recent Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, because Jamie Foxx was like the only good part of that entire movie. But yeah, I like, as I said, I think Jamie Foxx absolutely kills it in this film. Um, and with the cinematography and collateral, because obviously we have to talk about the digital aspect of these movies. I don't think it's as noticeable in this film. I don't think all of the film was shot with digital. I think a lot of the interior scenes were still shot on film, as opposed to digital. So it does become a lot more apparent in the next two movies we talk about. But even still, some of the filmmaking in this film is just so impeccable. Like Mann just has that like slickness to his directing. I think that's kind of the best way to describe it. It's just everything is just so slick, and everything is just so cool. Like I haven't seen him. I haven't seen a director sort of consistently shoot movies to look cool since like Melville. in the same way that Melville's movies are just really, really cool. Michael Mann movies are just so cool. I don't know. I don't know how I can describe it from a technical standpoint. But just the way he just maybe it's the lighting and the camera sort of movements and stuff, everything is just so cool and calculated and slick. And it's really apparent in this film.
Well, and with the digital element, one thing I think that made Man stand out, especially compared to a lot of people, when digital was kind of going over the scene, it was a cheaper option for a lot of low budget filmmakers to still make their movie and save on some money and time and headache of dealing with film. Man embraced it in a way where the one thing I was noticed when I've watched these more recently is he doesn't, most of the time I don't think he tries to emulate what film looks like. I think he really embraces what digital looks like all the time, and in the sense of how do we make a good movie with a digital look to it. And of course we'll get into Public Enemies, which is very unique looking, because it's completely shot on digital. But I think that is something he embraced, and I think that's why it's kind of stuck around. I know people hated this when it first came out, but I feel like there's a little bit more love around his digital look than it used to be.
Yeah, this is what really made me sort of choose these movies. So I've been hearing a lot that there's been a lot of revision around this kind of era of his filmmaking. And that there's a lot of people who kind of grew up watching these movies that are sort of looking back now and getting real nostalgic for how the film looks. And yeah, like with Public Enemies, it's kind of, and I was saying this to Neve when we were watching them, she watched all of these movies with me. And I kept saying to her, it's like, it's crazy how this film looks. It looks like like a TV show. It looks like, some some like sort of 24 series, like 24 episode series on a cable. It's just crazy how a big blockbuster movie, just looks like this. It looks so unique. It has such a unique aesthetic to it that there's no film really, like no sort of films really come close to it. Even like films that are shot on digital now, all the cameras are calibrated to try and emulate the look of film. So like you look at like pretty much most films nowadays are shot digitally, but the cameras are made to emulate how film looked. So they don't look like this, they don't look like this, or like Inland Empire, another film shot on digital, but I think it was with a much lower grade camera. But no films kind of look like these anymore. It's very much like it's just like this weird sort of time capsule of this early digital age where the cameras weren't made to emulate film. They were just made to be convenient to shoot. And Michael Mann he just killed it. He just killed the look, as Zach said. He really wanted to make sure the films just looked as good as possible with the equipment he had, without like trying to, like as you said, trying to emulate the film look, just make a new digital aesthetic.
I'm so glad we're kind of going down this path now that, first of all, I agree with everything that's been said. His movies do look very cool. I think that's the film school term. But I fully agree. Like he does understand how to capture energy very well. But the other thing is, Soderbergh was doing this too around this time. I think Soderbergh was probably one of the other big pioneers of digital.
And he's went to a whole step and now films on iPhone 7, so he's went even further with it.
No, totally. It's like it was Takashi Miike, Soderbergh, and Michael Mann as far as like auteurs that really embraced digital and just like ran with it. I'm sure there's a few more I'm leaving out, but
yeah, well,
for Soderbergh and
sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, it's cool. I don't. I was just gonna say for Soderbergh and Miike, I think it was maybe they're tinkerers kind of by nature, but it was also probably budgetary constraints, and so they were probably having fun with it. But the thing that it was fun about Man is like these are major Hollywood movies that he's tinkering with, which is kind of cool to see.
Yeah, I mean his goodwill for years. I mean, like Heat obviously gets a lot of goodwill because I mean that's going to be his defining film probably for his whole career. But I feel like he hit another era for him, and I think Collateral kind of fits the equivalent of that because he was able to, as you say, tinker around a lot with like these major films, but you do it in kind of a very experimental way. Like it's kind of funny now that we talk about like Tarantino and Nolan still being, one of the few that can still shoot on film, but they're kind of now the rarity. It's just now everybody's trying to emulate film the cheapest way possible. But Mann and a lot of them didn't necessarily do that.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's even with sorry, I'll just there's kind of two things I want to say on both of your points. So with you, Chris, you were mentioning different filmmakers and stuff. Completely agree with what you're saying. And Michael Mann really leaned into it. He wasn't someone who was experimenting with digital. He was embracing it. Because there
Yeah.
was other filmmakers who experimented with it. Spike Lee had that film Bamboozled, which was shot in digital. Obviously, I already mentioned David Lynch with Inland Empire. These are filmmakers who experimented with digital, but never really fully embraced digital, like actually like kind of used it as their primary medium going forward in the same way that Michael Mann did. So find that incredibly interesting. And I was going to make a point on what Zach said, but I've just completely forgotten what Zach
Sorry.
said. What were you just saying, Zach?
I was talking about like how Nolan and Tarantino kind of went the opposite way.
Oh yes, I remember now.
With film.
Yes, it's because and it's because, as you said, people are trying to emulate the film look. I remember when I was 16 in a film club, not a film watching club, an actual filmmaking club. There was a youth filmmaking club in my town that went on during the summer holidays. That's when I sort of first got really interested in film and filmmaking. But like the cheap DSLR camera that we had a mod to give film grain. So this was a DSLR digital camera, and it wasn't like an expensive one. It was just like a normal consumer brand DSLR that we were shooting on, and it had a mod to give your film the grain, or to give the digital the grain of film. So we're talking about stuff that anybody can just go buy in a store for a couple of $100, can suddenly make a film that looks like it was shot on film, even though it was shot digitally. Um, and this is the way that kind of digital filmmaking has gone. Everybody knows that they can't really use film wholesale anymore because the materials just aren't available for everybody to use film. And obviously digital is just a lot more convenient from a budgetary standpoint as well, but they don't want to let go of the look of film, which I completely understand. Film looks fucking great. I love the grain. I live for the grain. But it's really refreshing to see these films really embrace the digital aspect. Like some of like in Miami Vice, which we'll talk about, and I don't want to be jumping ahead. I want to talk about Collateral now, but like some of the noise that you get in like those nighttime scenes, that you can only get through digital. If this was film, everything would look
Yeah, that's
pretty
true.
crisp. There's so much noise in the camera, which is just such a unique aesthetic and something that I've really, really like. My takeaway: I didn't like all these films that we're going to talk about equally. I definitely have an order in which I like them. But one thing I loved about all of them is just how unique of an aesthetic they have. And it's purely because Michael Mann just really just embraced the digital aspect of it.
And I think the advantage that like, and you were you talking about a little bit about photography, Adam, I'm sure you're kind of more aware of this as well, is it is really hard to light night scenes on film. It's like the big advantage to digital in a lot of ways is you can do low light photography so much easier. And Mann really kind of thrives in low light. I mean, you look at, we're talking about Collateral, which I think is 100% at night. And then you look at Miami Vice, which spends a lot of time at night. He's able to kind of embrace it in that sense where, he can do pretty dark scenes with the digital photography that may be a lot harder, potentially even impossible on film. That's one of the things I talked about with like Bodies, Bodies that came out last year. Was it is pretty much a film that embraced digital photography because it is so low lit all the way through.
And it really helps that movie too.
Yeah, I mean, it's shooting night on film is its own kind of thing, and it's and that's not to say film looks bad at night. It definitely doesn't, but it's definitely a interesting change.
Well, Stanley Kubrick had to get particular lenses developed just so he could shoot in candlelight for Barry Lyndon, so it kind of says it all, really.
Yeah.
I want to I don't want to jump around too much, but I wanted to give a little bit of love to Stuart Beadle, the screenwriter for this. Did y'all read any of the story about like how this got developed and stuff?
Yeah, I was reading
I,
a little bit of the background. It's interesting.
It is interesting, right? This was a story from like a 17-year-old kid in Australia.
Yeah.
And then it just sort of, and the way that Hollywood works, it got rejected. And then it had different actors attached. I think at one point there was even an attempt to get either De Niro or Pacino to play the cab driver. And
It was Robert De Niro because they wanted to make it a reference to Taxi Driver.
that's right. That's what it was. Yeah. And then
I'm
I
so
think it was
glad they
Mike.
didn't. Like,
It would have been a very different movie. Yeah,
yeah.
agreed. Um, but it had who's the guy that was going to play Tom Cruise's character? It was um, Russell Crowe, I think.
I like Crow, but it's interesting because I would say this is both Tom Cruise and Jamie Foxx, like top three performances from both of them. So it'd be weird to even think about recasting them.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was gonna say. Like, this was kind of, for all of Tom Cruise's eccentricities, I guess, like this movie fits him very well. It's sort of perfect for him.
Yeah, it has that. He's able to have that sort of cold intensity that he probably can only
Yes.
do when he's in the privacy of his own home. So he does suit this well. I just pulled up the production notes on this just to confirm. Yeah, it was Russell Crowe, but also I remember this now. Funnily enough, the guy who was offered the role of Max before Jamie Foxx got it was Adam Sandler, and the only reason he couldn't do it was because of scheduling conflicts. So we could have had Adam Sandler as a taxi driver.
That would be it's so interesting, I guess, because it's just like two people, how much the movie changes just on who plays
Right.
Max. Like I'm sitting here like running through my head what it's like with De Niro, what it is with Sandler, like it completely just erases what the film is in a lot of ways. Like it is like I guess that's credit to Jamie Foxx. He is kind of the heart of what this movie is and the tone it achieves.
Yeah, his character is so
100%.
likable. He has just this sort of quiet charisma, I guess, is the best way to put it. He's not like obviously like a macho dude. He's not like overly confident or anything like that. But he has this kind of quiet charisma where it shows us with his different passengers that he talks to, as he's driving around in taxis. Um, at the start of the film before he picks up Tom Cruise. But like he's able just to talk to anybody, and people just seem to like him and get on well with him. So he has that kind of quiet charm and quiet charisma, which is like Jamie Foxx is a super charismatic dude, but like in a loud way. When you watch him on like talk shows and stuff, he's like the light of the party. Like everybody would gravitate to him. So it's kind of interesting seeing him play a more introverted role, but still having that charm. Which it's just a stellar performance. It's like it's not often that Tom Cruise gets upstaged, and I don't want to take away from Tom Cruise. I think he's great in this movie as well, and I completely agree. It's probably a top three performance from him that I've seen. Um, so Tom Cruise is great. Bad wig aside, um, Tom Cruise is great. But yeah, Jamie Foxx just completely steals this film. He was incredible in it, and I was surprised that from what I recall, I don't think this film that got any sort of Oscar nominations. Maybe he got nominated, but um, it's kind of crazy that he didn't win an Oscar for this. Again, depending on what else was in that year, but um, yeah, kind of crazy because Jamie Foxx is just so good.
It did.
Well,
It got nominated for two Oscars. Nominated for Best Performance by a Supporting Role for Jamie Foxx and a Best Achievement in Film Editing for Jim Miller and Paul Rubel.
All right, well now I need to find out who won over Jamie Foxx. Let's see.
Well, while you're doing,
Well,
I think, thinking back about who could have played Max in the movie, I think what Jamie Foxx brought to it, and I think this helps like the dynamic with like Cruise's character with Vincent, is Jamie Foxx brings a lot more of a blue collar energy than I think either one of the other options could have done, especially with how like big personalities or big like fame they have. I don't know. I feel like Max feels a lot more blue collar than the options of Robert De Niro and um, Adam Sandler
Adam
do.
Sandler.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it brings a more interesting dynamic to watch someone who does bring that kind of feels realistic to a blue collar person kind of go toe to toe with this guy who's very suave, who's very intelligent, but he's finding his own ways to get over on him. And I think that makes
I
a
think,
way more interesting dynamic than watching someone like De Niro, who's done this his whole career, do the same thing and it not feel quite as interesting.
yeah, that's the thing. Just culturally, I don't think you can put De Niro in this role, right? It's like now it becomes two heavyweights duking it out, so it's hard to believe his humble beginnings, I guess, right? Um,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
but then on the other side, Adam Sandler, I mean, in a weird way, I think he could have pulled this off. Like, he's pretty good in Uncut Gems. Like he has that, he can tap into that frenetic energy, but I don't think this movie becomes a story of like a mild-mannered guy, a mild-mannered dreamer who has a dragon or fire inside of him. I don't think that's what the movie is. But like
Yeah,
that's
and I
what
love
worked.
Adam Sandler, I really do. But yeah, it's so different of a movie if he's in it.
Yeah, exactly. It plays more like Punch Drunk Love or Uncut Gems, which are both great movies, but it's just very different from this, I think.
Yeah, it would have been a completely different energy. So it would have been interesting to see Adam Sandler's take, but yeah, it would have been completely different energy. And I really liked the dynamic and Collateral, as you said, Zach. With this, this sort of really kind of um, sort of steely, sort of hard, gritty sort of guy, suave, sophisticated versus the more mild mannered guy. I think it does create a good dynamic. Morgan Freeman won the Oscar over Jamie Foxx for his role
Well,
in Million Dollar Baby. So there you go.
okay, that's
Ah,
that's a hard one to beat. As
It
much as I
was an
think this is a
Oscar.
better
Yeah,
movie, it's a hard one to beat.
it's an Oscar-y movie,
God,
isn't it? So it's always going to be a
I did
tough one.
not like the second half of Million Dollar Baby. I was so in on the first half. I was like,
Well, I
this
mean,
movie's amazing.
that's a whole other conversation, but I think that was kind of Eastwood's point was like, it looks like so much like the Rocky movie, and it's
Mhm.
not. And it really pulls that rug hard.
True, true. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we need. You know, this movie just, if I could sum it up, I mean, and maybe we don't have to be done. I was just thinking of like what works so well for me. It's everything that we've talked about, but I think it's this combination of a script from a guy who has a very questionable career after this. Like his scripts include G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra, Derailed, 30 Days of Night. Um,
30 Days
you
of Night
know,
is good, but that's based off a comic, but it's good.
okay, okay, well that's good to hear. I haven't seen that one yet, but like I don't know that I would necessarily put him in this top tier of screenwriters, but for this story that I guess was very personal to him, if he's been trying to massage it since he was 17 or whatever. Um, I just think the writing was tight and like economic, um, or economical, and it was like as we moved on through the night of uh the assassin coming into the cab, taking over the cab, and you start seeing these hits come in. Um, I think the story moved along very well, and nothing felt overly forced. The only thing that felt forced to me, I think, was the fact that the first kill fell down on the roof and the cab was broken. I understand a story like how that plays into the story and how that's important for the cops to find the cab and some of that stuff. Like I get it, but that's the only thing that I don't think Tom Cruise's character would have done that if he was going to be in the cab all night. Like it feels like that's something he would have known, or because he was portrayed as this guy that thought every angle through. Um, but it's just a minor quip. Like outside of that, I think the writing was good, and Michael Mann was the right person to direct this because we'll get into some of his macho stuff later. I struggle when directors just go like full testosterone, but I think he seems like the right guy to balance this, and almost have like the horror background that he has. I think really helped this story. Like there's a scene in the when they're later on in the movie where Tom Cruise kind of just like appears in a window, and it's a slasher movie for 30 seconds. Um, it's just a straight up horror movie, and it was awesome. I was glad Mann was directing those scenes.
Yeah, and I think that's like what helps Collateral is it does feel like this almost like this mishmash of like different genres going in. Like it's it's hard to really nail it down. I mean, I guess people like the term thriller. I guess that would fit there. But you got you got moments of action. You have a little bit of horror. You have like all this kind of different the character drama and things like that. I think that's what really makes Collateral stand out than just like a necessarily like a pure genre piece that this could have turned into, depending on who makes it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
true.
yeah. Um, just I want to touch on my favorite scene, which kind of touches on what you're talking about with this kind of change up in genres quite quickly. But just to touch on the writing, yeah, I did largely like the writing. I think the only strike against this film I have, which kind of stops it from being like a masterpiece for me, is like how I just think the last like 20 odd minutes are just it just kind of goes over the edge of realism. Like throughout the whole film, like everything seemed pretty realistic. I think from the moment where the taxi flips kind of onwards, there's a lot of stuff there it's pretty that's a great way of putting it.
It's not
it just
contained anymore. Like it's a contained picture, right? Like
yeah,
before that moment.
it goes over the realms of kind of superhero-y stuff. We have this guy, mild-mannered Max, who's this chill dude who wouldn't hurt a fly, and all of a sudden he's like Jason Bourne. So like I don't know. In my mind, I'm always thinking like to think of this film that like Max dies during the flip and the rest of it is a dream or something because he all of a sudden he's able to try and best. And this isn't really a spoiler because I'm not going to talk about the exact ending or anything. But suddenly he's able to go toe to toe with Tom Cruise, who is a professional assassin. I just didn't really buy what was happening in the last 20 odd minutes of the film. It just kind of goes a little bit out of left field for me, but that's the only kind of strike I have really against it. Otherwise, I think the film is really, really great, and it didn't like ruin the film for me or anything like that. It's just something that kind of, kind of lingered with me a little bit afterwards, thinking about it. But one thing I just want to talk about briefly, like there's a lot of different sort of poignant or important scenes in this movie, as they go kind of person to person on this hit list that Tom Cruise's character has. I love the scene in the jazz club. I think that might be my favorite scene where they're speaking to the owner of the jazz club and Tom Cruise is like quizzing him and talking about
Oh
stories and
yeah.
stuff like that. Absolutely love that scene. And it's another thing that you're talking about where the genre kind of flips for a moment. It's almost like it has the same kind of energy to the um you know why am I funny? Why do you think I'm funny? From Goodfellas,
Mm-hmm.
that scene. It has that same kind of
Yeah.
energy where it slowly becomes more and more tense, and then it has that relief. In Goodfellas, it has comic relief to kind of relieve that tension. But in Collateral, it's much more adjacent to horror, and this is something that I've said for a long time. That comedy and horror are basically the same genre. It's just the outcome of the punchline is different. Um, they're essentially the same from a structure point of view. I think comparing the Goodfellas scene with the scene in Collateral really highlights that how they're structurally very very similar, but then it's just the outcome of how the punchline plays out is complete opposite, and that's the difference between the genres. But I love that scene. The scene in the jazz club is fantastic. Just wanted to highlight that.
I, just just so there's not too much silence after that because I just fully agree. Like that scene reminds me a little bit also of the scene from Throwdown. Do you remember the Johnny Toe scene where
Yeah,
it,
I do. Yeah, in the nightclub or
yeah,
whatever it is. Yeah.
yeah. And the only difference there is that Johnny Toe has that camera kind of spinning around as they shoot their way out. It's very he goes in a different direction as far as it being so cinematic. Um, but it's somehow they're able to capture this like really intense energy. I mean, to that point though, credit to Jamie Foxx's scene where he comes out of his shell and has to pretend to be Vincent.
Yeah,
Because I think that scene shows his range as an actor too, how quickly he kind of turns on it.
another really, really great scene. Yeah, absolutely.
With Jason Statham. We forgot to mention Jason Statham's in this movie.
Oh, yeah, he's at the very start of this movie. Yeah, he's in the
Yeah.
very first scene. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's one of his first, I guess one of his first American things.
Yeah, I think because he's in a film, was it The Transporter? I think is his.
Mhm.
It's a right around this time. It might have been a year before, maybe.
Yeah, because that's what they said. They like to think that this is his character from that movie. I
Gotcha.
remember I read something like that, that like behind the scenes they referred to his character as his character from the Transporter movie is making a cameo in this movie. It's like the
That's
same
awesome.
guy. So yeah, cool. Well, I suppose we'll move on then, unless we have anything else to talk about on Collateral.
I think I'm good. I think
Yeah.
Cool. So we're going to move up 2 years, and we are now going to talk about Miami Vice. So for those unfamiliar, again, here is the letterbox description. Miami Vice is a feature film based on the 1980s action drama TV series. Film tells the story of Vice detectives Crockett and Tubbs and how their personal and professional lives are dangerously getting mixed. Now, this might be just the this just might be me just being dense, but I had no idea that Michael Mann was the executive producer of the original series.
Okay, I didn't know
Uh,
that either, so that's really cool.
oh, okay, cool. I'm glad I wasn't the only person who didn't know that. I had no idea. I just assumed that this was just a
Oh.
remake. But yeah, Michael Mann executively produced Miami Vice. He didn't create it or anything like that, but he was the producer of it, like through its entire run.
Oh.
I'm glad I
So
am not the only one. I felt like I was an idiot saying that. I was going to keep that to myself. So I'm glad that you guys also didn't know this.
I think it's
Oh.
because I consider Mann such a 90s director. So the idea of him being like an executive producer of anything in the 80s feels almost kind of weird. Like, and that's not to say he didn't have like a career in the 80s, but like 90s is kind of where he came in on his to his own at that point.
Right.
But he was doing a lot of TV work in general. Like before he made feature films, he was making TV movies. So I think he just seemed to always be involved in those spheres in the 70s and the 80s. He was working a lot with TV executives. So I guess that's kind of where he sort of got in on the floor with this stuff. Um, but yeah, the original idea for this came from a rap party for Ali, and Jamie Foxx said that he should remake Miami Vice and let him star in it. That's literally how this sort of movie came to being. Was literally Jamie Foxx approaching Michael Mann to say, you should remake Miami Vice and kind of modernize it.
And I
Um,
mean, it because I've never seen the show, so it's hard for me to
Neither have I.
like. I maybe I should have watched like a couple episodes before then just to kind of. I know Don Johnson. I think it's Don Johnson's in
It
it.
was, yeah. Don Johnson is in the Colin Farrell role.
Yeah, and you know, because I like the movie. I actually the way I kind of described it in my review was it's a very vibey movie where I have zero clue what's going on in the film. Like I really don't. I couldn't tell you really what the movie is about. I enjoyed it, but it's almost like a more accessible Inland Empire to me, where it's like, yeah, this looks really cool. I have no clue what's going on.
Well, I was going to ask you to give us your thoughts first, so you've just done it there, so that's perfect.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I totally got that. The plot is very, very dense. I know essentially what's going on, that they're trying to get in with this drug runner who's bringing drugs into Miami, that's going to the Aryan Brotherhood, who are then selling it. But the Aryan Brotherhood knew that there was feds working on this, so they bring in the guys from the Vice Squad to work on this because they're essentially clean, and to try and get the main drug lord who's based in South America. That's essentially the general plot of this movie. But like so much other shit is going on the whole way through.
It's like
Um,
2 seasons of a television show squeezed
yes,
together.
100%. That's exactly what it is. Because there's so much, there's like A, B, C, D, E, F plots going on, that are all kind of merged together. Um, Chris, what did you think of Miami Vice before we sort of dive into it deep?
Well, so here's an interesting one that I don't really know how to process. This movie gained 1,600 spots on the latest They Shoot Pictures poll and
I'm not
is
surprised
now,
by that.
well, hold on, because it's now 1,115th of all time.
See, I would switch. Like, I think this is a good movie, but I would switch Collateral and Miami Vice, like their
Oh,
positions.
I
for
would
sure.
too. I would too. The reason I say I'm not surprised is because the when I sort of said earlier that you see a lot of revision online for Michael Mann's filmography, it's always about Miami Vice. And this was actually the film that drove me to even do this theme, was because how many times I've seen online recently in the last year or two people singing their praises about Miami Vice. So I'm not surprised purely because of this is the whole reason why I'm doing this theme, is because I've just been hearing so much about people revising Miami Vice.
And Black Hat's getting that too. He's finally getting his director's cut out for that. But people, there's people who trashed Black Hat. I haven't seen it yet, but there are so many people who say it's one of his best films, and it's so fascinating to see that.
Yeah, yeah, I had the same reaction. I was reading on Letterboxd reviews expecting people to like not like this movie. Um, but this is about when I was about halfway through, and then it turned for me. I think the second half of this movie, I kind of started to understand what it was, and I liked it better. But I was surprised how many people were giving it 5 stars. But just very quickly, it was a not a box office success, but mostly because it had a huge budget. This is a $135 million budget,
They gave him
which,
$135 million to make this movie. Oh my God.
yeah, yeah. But it was, he was one of the producers.
Okay, he gave himself that much money. Okay.
Yeah, right. And then so I don't know exactly. But then the other guy that produced it was probably, I'm assuming, an old friend. It was the guy that produced like Fatal Instinct, The Pelican Brief, Heat, The Insider. This guy named Peter Jan Bruga. Um, but anyways, uh,
I think with the budget stuff, from what I was reading, it was kind of a troubled production, and it's ironic because, as I mentioned, the man who was kind of the catalyst behind this film getting made was Jamie Foxx, and apparently Jamie Foxx was a bit problematic on set, not like in a like an abusive way or anything, but he was just kind of a dick to work with, which I felt that was really interesting considering it seemed like it was his idea. But I think he didn't like how some of it was going, and the reason the budget is so high, I think it's just because of the I don't want to call it globe trotting because they still stay in the Americas, but like they were like shooting on location. When we see them, in these sort of South American countries and stuff, like that's shot on location. It's not like a backlot or anything like that. So I think that was a big reason probably behind why the budget was so big on this, because Mann was pretty insistent on like shooting really in these places that the film was taking place, as opposed to doing it, in the backlot all on the US.
And without knowing for sure why, but I could almost see why like Jamie Foxx might have felt like maybe he bit off more than he can chew. He's like, oh yeah, remake the TV show that was probably made pretty cheap, and we did Collateral together, and we got this film in the Northeast, and it was not miserably hot, and it was all limited locations. And then you
And
go to Miami Vice, and it's the other way around.
And yeah, and it was actually, there was a lot of safety concerns. We'll talk about the ending a little bit, but the ending that we saw is like completely different from what Mann had planned. The ending was supposed to be completely different, and they had to change it because the set that they were working on in South America, there was real gunshots, and Jamie Foxx said, "Fuck this, I'm going back to America." So they were like, "Okay, well, we have to try and figure out a way to end this in Miami as opposed to in South America." So that's why the ending even exists in its current form. And Michael Mann said in an interview that one of his greatest regrets is that he never got to make his ending from Miami Vice.
And and this is like Jamie Foxx is obviously the rational one here, saying, because Mann is very famous for using blanks, using real gun sounds, and doing that in the middle of the South American jungle might not be the smartest thing to do. Like, no matter how much you do, there's like an inherent danger that could happen because, people who aren't familiar with Hollywood productions are down there shooting what sounds like real weapons, real automatic weapons.
Yeah,
This is it. It's an interesting point though, and maybe I'll just quickly. It's a good segue into kind of what I think about the movie because, like, I think I really did not like the first 45 minutes or whatever. I don't know exactly how long, hour. I was like, man, this movie is terrible. Um, but I realized at some point kind of what Mann was doing. Like I think he wanted, especially knowing he was an executive producer of the TV show. it kind of makes sense. I think he was trying to modernize the show. And I think, I don't like Colin Farrell in this role, but in a way it kind of works because he's sort of I think he was going for like over the top kind of hammy acting. Um, I don't think he pulled it off great, but it doesn't matter for Miami Vice, right? Like you can just kind of have some fun with it. Um,
I do think
I
it's fun. I think Don Johnson actually selected Colin Farrell, which I would too if I had a choice on who is going to play my character. So that's pretty
well,
cool. But yeah, it's
sure.
definitely a different different type of thing going on. I don't know if that's how he was in the show or not, but it definitely feels different for Colin Farrell.
No, he's different than Don Johnson. I hate to say this because I don't care. I think this almost like needed to be an American guy though, because I would never make that comment. Like I typically don't care, but this is like the most American show possible from the 80s, right? Like so I mean Colin Farrell's accent was okay. I think he maybe occasionally slipped into I don't know, a little bit of an accent, but for the most part I think he got it right. But this is again a movie where I think Jamie Foxx shows what a good actor he is. Um, I think he got his part down in a way that I wish Colin Farrell would have. I love Jamie Foxx in this. And I thought Colin Farrell was okay, but by the second half of the movie, I realized what I was watching, and I was able to kind of sink into it, and I wound up having a pretty good time. Zach, I saw you gave this 3.5 stars. I think it'll probably end up somewhere around there for me as well. It is a pretty fun movie, and it looks beautiful, and it is very stylized. So it's like this big budget, kind of genre film, which is fine.
Yeah, and I think I would have liked it a little bit more. Really, my biggest issue with the film is like I don't even care that I don't really understand the plot all that much. I get the basic gist, but I don't get the nuances of everything going on. That's all fine. I don't really care. I really don't know anything about their characters that much, and it's like this is kind of like I don't know anything about Colin Farrell's character. Like I know nothing about him.
Yeah,
I don't think he has any development all that much, and I think that's the part. Like I never felt like I was actually more interested in well, Jamie Foxx was one, and really everything else going on. Um, just because I didn't really know what to think of the character necessarily.
I completely agree with both you guys. I lament that we spent so much time with Colin Farrell's character and the character played by Gong Li. When I did not really care about them that much. I
yeah,
felt
yeah,
that their story was pretty uninteresting for the large part. And we spent it was like, I felt like Jamie Foxx was almost like a side character. We barely really saw him. And like,
yeah.
there's obviously that emotional kind of gut punch moment that happens towards the end of this movie that I feel like we're supposed to care about, but we don't because Jamie Foxx is he's almost like a secondary character. This is supposed to be about these two main guys, but Colin Farrell's story is pushed like way harder than Jamie Foxx's story, which I think
Mhm.
is a big shame, really, because like Fox is maybe calling him the better actor, maybe not the right terms. Colin Farrell is a great actor, especially as an Irish person. I kind of have to back my boy. But I think that Jamie Foxx was better in this movie, even though he wasn't in it as much. Farrell's accent is interesting.
Yeah.
It does slip into this almost like Louisiana accent, which is a bit odd
Right,
sometimes.
right.
It has this Cajun thing going on. Really, really, really odd. This was an era of Hollywood that was trying to push the Colin Farrell as an action actor narrative, and I think he's so much better is in a kind of introverted role, the sort of weirder roles he's been playing kind of since in Bruges. I think he's so much better in those roles than he is in this kind of macho role. I just think it
Yes.
just doesn't suit him a lot. And Hollywood is really trying to push him as that.
And I
So
think it's because he's good in those like fake action movies. Like we talked about Phone Booth off here. Phone Booth isn't an action film, but it kind of presents itself as one.
yeah, but he
And
doesn't
it's
play
really
an
a
action
character study
character
for
in it.
him. Yeah.
he doesn't play an action character in it. He's the victim. In Phone
Yeah.
Booth. It's interesting. So I don't know why they wanted to really push this kind of macho stuff with him. It's maybe just because he just kind of has the look for it, maybe. But I think in terms of his acting abilities, I think he's just so much better playing a sort of weirder, more introverted character than playing someone kind of all action. So yeah, I don't think the role suited Farrell. And I would have loved to have seen way more Jamie Foxx's characters. I feel like he's super underdeveloped, and I don't know if that is just because of the onset conflicts between him and Mann and the production staff or whatever, or if it was a scripting decision. I can't really say for sure why we don't see more Jamie Foxx's character in it. But I wish we did, because the whole subplot with Colin Farrell and Gong Li's characters is fine as like a B plot, but it essentially becomes the A plot. It's like it
Right.
essentially it becomes what the whole film is about, and it's just kind of a weird creative choice. But I will say, like, as much as we said earlier, the plot is fairly impenetrable. A lot of the time, I understand the basic nuances of what they're doing and why they're in this scenario, but what's kind of happening from a minute by minute point of view sometimes gets a little bit lost. Um, this film looks so cool. It's just such an interesting, unique aesthetic, as we mentioned before. It has a lot of really cool vibes. When the action scenes do happen, they are really, really great. That
That
kind of
shootout's
final,
awesome. Yeah.
yeah, the final shootout is so good. Really, really, really good. So I totally get why people are starting to love this movie. Um, I could see myself revisiting it in a few years to kind of give it another go now that I kind of know what to expect. Maybe my expectations were in the wrong place. I still like it. I definitely still, it's probably in like my top four out of the six Michael Mann movies that we've seen, that I've seen the last couple of weeks. So it's still up there. I still
Yeah.
like it. It's an interesting film. It's an interesting experiment in digital filmmaking. I just wish the plot was a bit more balanced between the two main characters. That's really my main issue with this film. I just wish that there was more with Jamie Foxx's character, because I thought him and his love interest, it's also on the Vice Squad. I would have loved to have seen more of their relationship kind of developed, because it obviously does, it does eventually become a major plot point. But I felt like it was underdeveloped, so it was hard for me to care once their plot kind of kicked in.
Speaking of the digital filmmaking part in the shootout, I did want to highlight just kudos to Michael Mann for doing the kind of beating the Batman to the punch, where people talk about like it being lit with the muzzle flashes. He did that in that shootout, and it looked great. That's probably a
True.
big part of the digital photography, because that was like my favorite part of the shootout, is that every time that guy shot, you could see him light up, and I just thought that was really cool.
True.
Yeah, you don't see that a lot in movies and I think the reason why he did that, from what I was reading, the reason why he did it with like blanks and stuff was because he prefers to capture the sound live, as opposed to adding the gunshot sounds in afterwards in post production.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, that's what he did at
apparently,
Heat, and Heat was an accident. Like he just didn't like the sound, and he said, "I don't know, it sounds pretty good just live," and they just
yeah,
sort of
and
kept
I
it.
agree. It does sound good. It sounds much more realistic than it does sound when every other film puts gunshots in post. Um, Now that I've heard them in his films, it's gonna sound distinctively different.
Yeah, I mean, because I mean, even then, like because he's also using blanks, you also get to hear the cartridges hit the ground. Like you're hearing that metal hit the pavement, and it makes it so
Yeah.
unique. And it gives Man's really good at texture. Like that was the thing I loved about like Last of the Mohicans,
Blue.
is his battle scenes had so much texture to them.
That's a great point.
Yeah, it's a really good call out.
Um,
There's a lot of
I,
depth in his films.
there really is, and I think like even with like Miami Vice, thinking about it now, and like the biggest issue is, I don't feel like there was enough time. It's almost like the movie was made a little too early. Like now, limited series are such a big thing. He could make like a 5 or 6 limited episode series of this, and I think it's in the same style and everything. And I think it's a lot more successful.
I could totally see this as like a 6 episode miniseries on Showtime or something like that. It would totally, totally suit the kind of modern sort of streaming age. This could definitely have been done. It's a really good call out as well.
Yeah, and especially
Well,
because I mean, when he was making it, you couldn't do a lot of this stuff on television. Like that first gunshot you see with like the 50 cal into the car, you're probably not getting away with that too much on television in 2006, unless it's like prime time or paid streaming and stuff.
HBO, HBO
Yeah,
or something. Yeah.
yeah, that was one thing I wanted to touch on, so it's a good segue, I guess. This was a extremely beloved show, right? So
Mhm.
you had this kind of built-in audience that was going to go watch a Miami Vice movie. And I don't know exactly the reactions from Miami Vice fans. I assume some hated it just because it was a little, it's different from the show. The
I
show
mean, you
had a
have
high
older people
energy.
who are like, "Whoa, this is too violent." I mean, and I could get
Yeah,
that. It's going to be a lot more violent.
it is going to be a lot more violent. Yeah, and also the show was never, I wouldn't say it was ever really dark. Like it wasn't a laugh a minute or anything, but I don't think it was ever really that dark. Like the stakes were never really that high, in the sense of you knew they were gonna win, and like it was just like it's just interesting to see how they were gonna solve this or like beat the bad guy or whatever. That was, but this one it kind of got dark. Javier Bardem, right, was the
Mhm.
one who
Oh, was that Javier
his
Bardem? I
Yeah.
did not even realize that was him. That is awesome. I did not
he
realize it.
was his I mean he's such a great actor, right? But he was so
Yeah.
good in this. And it kind of got dark for a bit. Um, I don't know what I fully agree with everything you all said about the subplot with Gong Li. I don't know. It felt thrown in, I guess. I don't know what you do if you're making a Miami Vice movie. I don't know if he had an intention of making this a franchise, but the way he made this, it doesn't seem like he was going to make a franchise. It felt
No, it
like he
seems
was
very
just,
self-contained. It really does. I agree with that.
Yeah,
yeah.
this is honest for the lack of better word, this is an action art film. This does not seem franchisey to me. This is an art film that just happens to have the name and characters of an 80s cop show.
Yeah, and
Which
I mean, yeah, and it's interesting because this made MCU comes out 2 years after this, right? So
Yeah.
franchising is going to start being big. It's almost like he may have made it at the right time,
It's
though I
kind of
still think he
crazy.
should have made it a limited series.
Just one small fix. It wasn't Javier Bardem in this. You're mixing it up with Collateral. Javier Bardem was in Collateral. Wasn't
Okay, I
in.
was like, who was he? Because I was sitting here like wrapping my head, like, who did where was Javier in this movie? And I was like,
oh shit,
he was really a chameleon at some
It's
point because I
very
was like, I
similar. It's similar kind of roles, so I understand where the mix-up came in
yeah.
because they do kind of have similar roles than in Collateral.
Okay. I was like, I know that he uses a lot of the same actors for a while, so I was like, it probably is there somewhere.
No, you're exactly right. This one is a guy named Luis Tosar, who I don't actually know that much about, but he played the drug lord, the kingpin. He was so good in that. He was very he could really go dark. Um,
Yeah, he had such intensity in
he had a great intensity.
yeah, in his eyes, just crazy. I don't know if it was
Yeah,
just me,
exactly.
and maybe you have to look him up or something, but like I can't quite put my pin on it, but he looks exactly like if Robert Pattinson had no hair.
I like it.
Just trust me. Just trust me on this.
Oh, interesting.
If you
I'm
shaved off Robert Pattinson's hair and gave him a beard, they look exactly the same.
I
They have
can
the same
okay.
eyes.
I can see it. I'm looking at his picture now.
Yeah, they both kind of have those like deep set eyes, right?
Yeah, they have the same eyes.
Oh, interesting. There's some doppelgangers in action here.
But anybody got any final words on Miami Vice before we move on to Chris's favorite?
It's it's not the 1115th best movie of all time. That's insane, but it is fun.
It's an interesting film in form. It's
Oh,
that's the best way I can put it.
I know, Chris, you watched the theatrical. Adam, did your movie start with a boat race with the opening credits?
A speedboat race.
Okay,
No,
then I was the only one who watched the director's cut. Okay.
okay. No, mine started in that nightclub.
Okay, yeah, there's like a whole opening that's very like 80s television. Like that's what you
Oh,
would see in like the opening credits of an 80s TV show. So that's in the director's cut if you decide to revisit it.
okay. I just watched whatever was on streaming, so I don't own this physically or anything like that. So I just watched whatever version I could stream.
Yeah,
Yeah, I bought the
Netflix for
movie the
me.
other day, so I was like, oh, okay, director's cut, cool.
Yeah, one thing I was
Yeah.
surprised that there was no boot. Well, I guess maybe you're going to correct me here, but I didn't think there was like a boutique. This seems like something Arrow would release
I
at
don't
some
think there
point.
has been one. Though I mean they're doing Black Hat, so maybe they'll get to it.
Yeah, I could really see Arrow or Second Sight doing a release of this at some point. Um, I,
100%.
I, I was kind of surprised that there wasn't
100%.
one already. But anyway, yeah, let's move on because we don't want to spend too much time here. Because we're talking about three movies as opposed to two. So we're going to jump up. Then let me just get the years again here. I'm about to losing them. Give me a sec.
2009.
2009. Cool.
Hmm.
So yeah, jump up to 2009, and we're going to watch. We're going to talk about Public Enemies. Um, so the letterbox description for Public Enemies reads as follows: Depression era bank robber Don Dillinger's charm and audacity endear him to much of America's downtrodden public, but he's also a thorn in the side of J. Edgar Hoover and the fledgling FBI. Desperate to capture the elusive outlaw, Hoover makes Dillinger his first public enemy number one and assigns his top agent, Melvin Purvis, to the task to bring him in dead or alive. That was way too long for what this needed. Anyway, Public Enemies. So nobody, I haven't gotten to go first, so I'm going to go first this time. I don't mind Public Enemies. I'm probably going to sit in between you guys on Public Enemies, probably. I think it's kind of mid, but it's not bad. Photography again, like Miami Vice, was super interesting. This was the first one. I didn't watch them in the order we've talked. It was actually jumbled up. This was the first one that I watched. From the first Michael Mann movie I've seen, technically, I suppose, when I think about it. So the digital photography was obviously a huge standout for me here. Looks super interesting. Johnny Depp, we won't really talk about his character. I mean, as in like his real life character. He's interesting in this role. I think he's fine. I'm not really a big Johnny Depp guy in general. I think he's pretty overrated, actually, by a lot of people. But he's okay in this. I think Christian Bale knocks it out of the water. He's like way better. He's like the whole reason why I like this movie a lot because I think Christian Bale is fantastic. Um, my main gripe with Public Enemies is the same gripe I have with pretty much every biopic, which is that I just don't like the pacing of the movie. I don't like how it's plotted, and this is my issue with a lot of biopics because it's really hard to have a sort of organic beginning, middle, and end when you have a biopic because you're kind of just taking a slice of somebody's life and presenting it as a piece of entertainment. So it's difficult to have something that is an organic beginning, middle, and end like you would have in a normal film. And that's kind of my main issue with Public Enemies. Like this film is over 2 hours long. I'm like, I don't think it needed to be. There's a lot of stuff that's happening and it's just fluff about like daily lives and stuff that doesn't actually really matter towards the end. I don't think it's a bad movie. I'm definitely going to think more highly of it than Chris did. I certainly don't think it's bad by any means. It's just very mid for me.
Yep.
So I think maybe we'll go next to Chris and then Zach will take us home
Okay.
with maybe a more positive opinion.
So, even though They Shoot Pictures has been wrong twice today, I think they got this one right. It currently ranked as the 14,585th best movie of all time.
Actually,
That feels
switch
about
Miami
right.
Vice in this. I take it back. Switch Miami Vice in this one. Just kidding. No,
Um,
no, don't
so
do that.
this one goes up to
No, no. For
1,115%.
some reason, I thought they were rational and put it at 3,000. I was right. Never mind. They didn't do that for Miami Vice.
Um, it was just because we mentioned it twice, I'll just say it performed kind of average at the box office, I guess. The budget was estimated somewhere between 80 and 100 million, so let's just say 100, because people always probably put a lower number than they would want to on this. And it made 214, so it probably lost a little bit, but hopefully it got some streaming money or something. I don't know. I'm sure they figured out a way to at least break even. I don't hate Public Enemies. It's fine. It's just not creative, and unfortunately, I saw a movie from 1973 recently called Dillinger, which is this story, but it has 1973. But it has Warren Oates playing John Dillinger, and Warren Oates is just one of the best actors who's ever lived. So it's not fair to put Johnny Depp up against Warren Oates. Um, and the movie is much more. I think the Dillinger movie um, puts us creates a period piece in the way that it feels. It almost feels like "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" Something like that. Like it creates this period piece. And I think it does a better job of getting you in the mindset. It's not as impressed with Dillinger in the sense of making him this star, like in the way that Johnny Depp was kind of centered around being this star. It's more about the team and kind of the family that he creates, this criminal family. And the only other thing I'll mention, I know that we're not talking about the Dillinger movie, but just an interesting point. I would really push people to watch this because it's directed by John Milius. Do y'all know that name off the top of your head?
Conan and Red Dawn. Yeah, yeah.
No idea.
Well, specifically, he was the guy that won an Academy Award for writing Apocalypse Now. And then yes, you're correct. Conan and Red Dawn as far as directing. But the dude is a really good accomplished writer. And so I think it's also a better screenplay. So I would say don't watch Public Enemies from 2009 because it's a pretty bland biopic. Go watch Dillinger from 1973 and become like involved in this world and like really kind of smitten with the character of John Dillinger in a way that I don't think Johnny Depp can pull off. So I don't know. I'll probably give this like 3 stars, 2.5 to 3 stars. I don't know if I'm gonna put a heart on it or not. I might. It's fine. It's just like the Titanic. Like it's just a series of events that happen, and they record it. It's like it's okay. Um, so yeah, I'll leave it there.
You know, you
And I
you might have had like a legitimate point until you tried to bring down Titanic, and then it just
sorry.
erases
That's
everything you just
just
said.
like so unnecessary. So
Oh,
unnecessary.
sorry. It was
Because if
it
you're
was a
going to
low
talk
blow.
about,
Sorry.
because if you're going to talk about run-of-the-mill biopics, I don't think Titanic qualifies because it's a completely fictional story within the confines of a factual event. So I don't even think you
No,
can
no,
even
no.
use that.
That was just to stir up some shit. I don't think this. I think Titanic is better than this. Um, but please, Zach, go ahead.
I think, you know, because the first time I watched this movie, I didn't really care about it. And it's honestly a lot of the reasons you're saying, Chris, because, you know, it doesn't seem like it's pushing against Dillinger as much as it should. Of course, we know Dillinger was an awful person. But what I think the movie actually does incredibly well, and really what I appreciate about it, is it's not giving you a Dillinger biopic. It's framed as one. But to me, what it's really doing is it's showing the perspective of the public at that time. During that time, these people were, you know, they were the evolution of the Old West outlaws. You know, this was just
hmm
50 years after that. The
hmm
public loved the stories of Bonnie and Clyde and Don Dillinger, Babyface Nelson, you know, those type of people, Pretty Boy Floyd. And they really, really, really hated the feds. In the Old West, it was the Pinkerton Agency that ends up becoming a big part of the FBI. The public still hates them. And this movie is kind of giving that, to me, gives that perspective so brilliantly of why the public felt that way. Because it feels so weird, you know, almost a century removed from that. Like, why did these people look up to people like John Dillinger? Why did they love them? You know, he murdered people. He stole people's money. But it was because
Right.
he was so anti the federal government, which people were very sour on. You know, whose money is he stealing? He's stealing the federal government's money.
Mm,
And to them, he is a Robin Hood like hero. And this movie is trying to show you why they felt that way. Because in 2009, we can look back and say, that's a really weird moral decision to make, but it makes sense in the confines of Public Enemies.
Yeah.
Zach loves him an outlaw.
I do. I like outlaw stories.
Honestly, I do too. And this is why I want to plug the 1973 version of this movie again. Look at the supporting cast behind War Notes. Harry Dean Stanton, Jeffrey Lewis, Richard Dreyfuss. That's like the supporting cast. Like
Pretty
it's just a
sick.
better version of this. Yeah, and then Cloris Leachman playing the romantic lead, which is funny, kind of knowing who she became. But just top to bottom a stacked cast, and I think I do want to give credit to Christian Bale. I mean, it's no mystery that he's a good actor, but he was required to be the guy that could bring down John Dillinger, and he nails it. Like he's just perfect in this movie. I will say that.
Yeah, it's funny we
Like
were
he's
talking
so
about accents with like Colin Farrell, but Christian Bale is like the god of accents. He's so
Yeah.
good at.
And to me, I think another reason I've always liked this movie as I've rewatched it is it's a very antithetical to Heat. He pulls a lot from Heat in this, and I think it's like really fascinating because one of the big ones is, the big part in Heat is it's the first time Al Pacino and Robert De Niro share a scene together, and of course that there's a lot of lead up to that in the original Heat. This movie does have the meeting, but it's very not a central point. Like it's not like they have one scene together. It's not even close to the best scene, but I don't think it's supposed to be. It's almost like I don't want to say parodying that, but in a sense it's being like showing the opposites between the two, because Heat is also a bank robbers and police movie, banks and robbers and stuff like that. And this one, I even think he even pulls that when he does the shootout at the lodge later in the film. It is almost the opposite of everything Heat does, but it's still done incredibly well. It's very chaotic. When you look at Heat, you have guys who are military trained or police trained, and the camera is so still watching them and watching how methodical and even in a chaotic situation, how good they are at this. Whereas you look at Public Enemies, the idea is you have a bunch of guys who wave a gun around but have no idea what to really do with it. And I think he captures that so well in the shootouts. And I just think the shootout in general, that takes place at night. Heat takes place in the broad daylight where there's a ton of people around. So I think there is an interesting element between those films that he made where I think he purposely does some things opposite of Heat because they share so many similarities.
Yeah, I didn't catch that. That's a good shout out. There is a lot of similarities to Heat, just obviously with the sort of main idea of the plot and different things, the different plot points that happen throughout the film. It's a good shout out. And the shootout in this film was really great. I really, really liked the shootout in this film. I thought it was cool how they did the different kind of sections of it. Where they're in the house going from on the run through the woods to getting into the cars. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, and like I said, it's a lot. Like a lot of people criticize it being so shaky, but I think that's a design choice. Like I don't think it's like Mann didn't know what a tripod was. I think he really wanted this to feel a lot more chaotic, and a lot of questions about who's getting shot, who's even alive at this point. Like I think there is a lot of questions about who's even alive by the time it's over.
Yeah. That's a good point, actually. That's exactly how it would have been, I think. I mean, who knows, but it seems like it, right? You're tying into the Wild West and how these are the new outlaws from the West is super interesting, and I think it plays in well to what you're saying. I hadn't really made that connection before.
Now, on that point, that's a cool concept, and a lot of films have that kind of outlaw concept and look back at the time and look at how society viewed these people. But does that make the film good? Is the question.
I think, that's obviously going to be subjective, but I think one thing I really like about that is, I think this actually like ties into his use of digital in a lot of ways where, if you're doing a 1930s period piece, there's a lot of habit to go with the old ways, to not push forward to, what this is, we need to look like the Godfather here. Where I think, the movie plays a lot into time is moving on from who these people are. The world is changing, just kind of like, you look at the Wild Bunch. It's about a bunch of outlaws who aren't letting the world change, or they don't
Hmm.
want it to. And I think this is the same way. You get to this point, liquor is going to be legalized again. These guys don't serve a purpose anymore, and the world is moving on. Just like I think Mann sees that way with people stuck on film. You pull in digital, you embrace the digital because the world is moving on, and I think that plays like so well into that.
Zach's thesis on this is so well thought out that he's getting points just because.
Thank you.
No, I
I'm
feel
sorry.
like I don't even want to. I don't even want to say anything. Like you're doing a great job of selling this.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you.
Very
You made me
thoughtful.
prepare last night when you told me you didn't like it. Like, all right, now I gotta like figure out what
Zach,
I like about this film. I gotta like sit down and think about it.
Zach stayed up all night angry writing notes in preparation for this.
Rage critic.
Yeah. No, I do. I love what you're saying though. I would
Um,
have never thought about anything like that. So it's a really cool comparison to make between the movie, both the sort of the art and reality aspect of it.
Well, I've gotten all my points out of the way. So if you guys want to
We've
continue, feel
broken we've
free.
well we've broken Chris, it seems. Uh,
yeah.
I I I was always in the middle anyway. I think the film was fairly mid. There's nothing particularly wrong with it. I don't think it's bad or anything like that. It's just fairly middle of the ground for me.
Yeah, so I think I do want to just kind of quickly touch on some of the cast in this. I was really interested in this. Marion Cotillard, the woman from Inception, is, I mean, honestly, she's just one of the most beautiful actors, maybe in history for me, but for sure in recent history. She's very much my type of woman. So I'm always smitten when she's on the screen. But I like her intensity. I think she does a lot of acting with her eyes. And I think she's good in this. It's a little bit funny to have her as an American sort of sweetheart, um, and have Christian Bale as the FBI agent, and then Billy Crudup as J. Edgar Hoover. Doesn't really matter. It's just kind of funny that he's getting all these non-American actors. But and then Stephen Dorff was in this, and then random, but I think I even saw Giovanna Ribisi at one point.
hmm Yeah, I think I remember him being in it. He's one of the he gets shot. I think he gets killed during the shootout. Like I think it's a pretty
Something
small
like that.
part. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But it makes sense, right? Mann is a respected auteur, and I just wanted to kind of use the discussion of cast to quickly go into my final point on Michael Mann. So he's a guy that he's deeply entrenched in Hollywood. Like he'll be able to make movies as long as he wants to, right? And I'm sure he
Mhm.
does producing on the side. He's a pretty wealthy person, it seems like, which is good for him. He seems to really love movies. I have to give him credit for that. Like he's one of these filmmakers that to me I would trust um as a producer, and more often than not as a director too. He's made some stone cold classics. So he really relies on style. To me, he's a little bit like Brian De Palma in the way that he just like really leans into style. Um,
I
and
can get that.
yeah, and a lot of people want to work with him. Um, it makes sense. He's almost guaranteed a theatrical run, I'm sure, when he makes something. Um, I think he fills a good role. He's the type of director for me that I want making um like a big budget sort of Hollywood movie. Like I think he's going to bring his own style to it. He's an auteur at the highest end of the income spectrum, or the highest end of the budget spectrum. And I like that those directors are out there really pushing their voice. So I was skeptical going into this week. Um, I wouldn't have never chosen Michael Mann week, but I'm so glad to have finally seen Collateral. And I think, to your point, Adam, I think Miami Vice is gonna um, on a second viewing, I think I'm gonna like it even more. And then we'll see about Public Enemies. Just watch Dillinger from 1973. But um, yeah, I like Michael Mann. I think I'm on board with him. I'm gonna give him more credit and try to go watch more of his stuff.
Last of the Mohicans. Watch Last of the Mohicans.
I have seen that. It's a beautiful movie.
Oh my God.
Fantastic movie. Yeah, yeah.
Such a good score. Like the score is like probably what adds like a whole star to that movie just because it's so good.
Yeah.
That goes back to Public Enemies. I do think that's the best score in a Mann movie since Last of the Mohicans. Like the score for Public Enemies is really good. I listen to it a lot.
I would say if you have to watch Public Enemies, go watch Road to Perdition, and you'll have a better experience. Or if you really want to watch a John Dillinger story, go see Dillinger. I don't think there's a reason to see Public Enemies, but obviously we differ on that. That's just my take. Yeah. Any final thoughts from y'all on The Man Who's Man?
I
No,
think
just
I'm
again,
good.
I'm glad I finally saw some of his movies. He's a filmmaker that I've grown to enjoy and direct, and I'll be um I'll be keeping up with his films. I know his Ferrari film is going to be coming out later this year. I think it just had its premiere at the Venice Film Festival, I'm pretty sure. So I'll be catching that whenever it comes out. So yeah.
And watch it so we can get Heat 2. I think this has to do well for us to get Heat 2.
Oh, interesting. The Heat cinematic universe.
Yeah, he wrote a novel, I think last year. Like he wrote a whole book on like what the sequel for Heat 2 would be. It's very Godfather 2, like it's a lot of like in the past stuff. And then I think I hadn't read it yet, but I think it's like some in moving forward and moving backwards at the same time.
Well, I know you're hoping that Timothy Chalamet gets the role.
Who I think it's going to be Adam Driver, thank God.
Okay, well, there's an interesting kind of tie-in here to what I want to choose next. So, Collateral was written by an Australian.
Mhm.
Both Collateral and Miami Vice were filmed by an Australian. Um, and I started thinking about genres and countries that we haven't been to yet or haven't experienced yet on the podcast. And I had a couple of different ideas, but I ended up landing on Ozploitation. Um, there's just, you know, typical 70s, 80s, maybe even playing into the early 90s. There was an explosion of, relatively low budget, low to mid budget action genre movies coming out in Australia, that are super fun. Mad Max is the most famous for sure. Um, but there's an entire film industry there. And one of the biggest names that hasn't really left the country as much as he should have is a guy named Brian Trenchard Smith. He's probably, I'm trying to think of a good example. He's like the Bruno Mattei or Bruno Mattei, or Antonio Margaretti or somebody of Australia. Just deep genre fans have seen his stuff. Fun as hell. I'm hoping that this is a really fun week. The two movies I want to choose from him are one is called Dead End Drive-In, which I have seen and I can vouch for it. Uh, Imagine if it's, you know what? I don't even really want to say too much. Just Dead End Drive-In is the first one. Second one is called Escape 2000, and it also has a US title called Turkey Shoot.
Yeah, Severn
Um,
put that out. I remember that. I meant to get it.
yeah, that's right. And Dead End Drive-In's an Arrow title. Um, I'm excited to show our millions of dedicated listeners, Brian Trenchard Smith. I hope people watch along. These are fun. So I'm hoping for some fun conversation next week or next time we meet.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it.